So if there's one thing that is true about Bitcoin or true about cryptocurrency broadly speaking, is that things move incredibly fast. And I was thinking about this. I was thinking about this recently, and I realized that the reason why this is moving as fast as it is because we really have had almost no financial innovation in about 50 or 60 years. And that's been because every time financial innovations come along, there has been a way to stop it. And because the incentives to stop it for the existing power structure have always been so great that, we get little sneaks through, like a debit card, woohoo, NFC, woohoo. But ultimately, we're talking about the same systems, the same companies. I mean, what other industry has that? Now we have a system where you don't have that problem, where the fail states aren't reliant on central points of failure and instead are reliant on either broad invalidations of technology or, mass exodus from these new technologies. So failure by either adoption or failure by technical failure, but not failure by permission. And so if that was what was stopping us before, then that means that we have about 50 or 60 years of technological and financial innovation that should be happening pretty much all at once, because as it's been bottled up, suddenly the cork is off and the pressure can be released. That's kind of a long way of saying that we started this show 7 months ago. And
so much has happened in that time.
Yeah.
What a wild ride.
Seriously.
Yeah, holy shit.
We're recording this, and I think we just released episode 66. That doesn't include the bonus content that we've released. That doesn't include the debates that we've hosted. That doesn't include the amount of things that have changed in this amount of time is crazy. And I wanted to share some perspective. When I started Let's Talk Bitcoin, I had been unemployed for 2 years. I was living off of savings at that point, and also help from my parents. And I had sort of retreated into the trees, as I like to say. I grew up in the Napa Valley, and we have some redwood forest up there that's very, very steep, too steep for agriculture, too steep for conventional agriculture, but for the type of unconventional systemic permaculture that I've always been interested in, and that my wife has been very interested in, it was kind of perfect. The point is that when I retreated into the trees, at that point I had been reading Zero Hedge every morning at 4 a.m. for about 2 years and trying to learn, and watching Mises.org videos and lectures from conferences and things like that, and was really looking for a way to have an impact in the space. And this is where I saw that we could have an impact. Initially, I started a different show besides Let's Talk Bitcoin. And on the last episode of that show, the Daily Bitcoin Show, we had Andreas on as a guest, and he described in very fiery fashion why Mt. Gox was criminally incompetent and why that was probably never going to change. And Stephanie, we brought her in initially because I wanted to have someone who was not me doing the introduction to the show. And so we initially contracted with Stephanie to do the voice work for the show. And as we kind of talked and we got to know each other a little bit better, it crossed my mind that I was interested in her as a guest host because you were already doing a Liberty show at the time. And so then that project imploded. After 5 days, it was a daily show, and I was doing all the work myself on zero budget. I called it my feats of strength. The idea was that you do an impossible thing in an impossible time frame with absolutely zero budget and no talent whatsoever, and then people think that you're amazing. And so we did this, and my timing was great because that initial show, those initial 5 episodes were during the price bubble where we jumped up to $260. And at the end of the price bubble, I collapsed. and then 2 days later, the price collapsed. Absolutely. And I took like a week off and just like slept because I hadn't been sleeping.
I remember it from my perspective when you came to me and we had a long conversation about how the previous show had collapsed. And you were quite dejected at the time and feeling that you didn't have the energy to reboot, and you'd created expectations for a daily show, and could you really pull off a weekly, and how you would find hosts. And more importantly, how people weren't appreciating the value of having an audience and having high quality production, but were looking for, quite a bit of money in order to be involved in the show. And I remember trying to persuade you that this was the greatest blessing you've ever received, because out of that wreckage, you had an opportunity to wipe the slate clean, set your own terms, and start again. And, we decided to do just one show off the cuff that Friday. And, the rest is history. I feel like the chemistry clicked and we created something wonderful, which was able to really highlight your incredible talents and bring this show to the level it has been today. It was a phoenix moment, out of the ashes of the previous show, you created something wonderful.
I think that we created something wonderful. I definitely think that this has been, very much a team effort. This feels like I'm just sitting here patting us on the back. That's not my intention. The point is that the perspective, that you gain from from being involved in a project like this. On the one hand, it's not a one-way thing. We're not giving out value and getting nothing back in return, even besides the monetary side of it. You know, the connections that we've made and the people who have reached out to us and the people we've met. I mean, really, you know, we were talking about conferences earlier. That's why these conferences are so valuable, is because the people who you meet and the people who are actually self-selecting to be interested are pretty freaking incredible. And so again, like,
opportunities come out of it like wildfire.
I feel like Let's Talk Bitcoin has just been one series of tipping points after another, because really what's happened is that we've hitched our wagon to Bitcoin. So when Bitcoin goes up in price, our audience goes up. When Bitcoin goes down in price, our audience stays put. Because people, once they kind of get looped in and they understand what's going on, then they don't leave. And that's really different, I think.
You know, I think as we go forward, we've got to be careful. Things are moving so fast in the Bitcoin world, and we've got to be careful to communicate in a way that people can understand, even if they're new. And also stay on the cutting edge for those who are already in the loop about Bitcoin and aware of what's going on. And I think we've done a pretty decent job of that so far. Maybe we could be a little more newbie friendly, but you know, that's okay. We're working on it all the time.
I totally disagree with that. I feel like we have not done a newbie friendly show at all. I even listened to our recent newbie friendly episode, and I don't feel like it's that, because I mean, the core problem is that when I started Let's Talk Bitcoin, the conversation that I wanted to have, you know, I had in my head that I wanted it to be for new users, because that was where I really saw the niches. New users coming in had no options, zero options. It was terrible. Now they have things like trybtc.com. Now, I mean, there are solutions out there that aren't audio podcasts, but that actually can kind of help walk you through that process. The conversation I feel like that we've been having is this more higher level conversation, is this conversation that's necessary to have simply because it's the important one right now. And it's not a new user-friendly conversation, because we're talking about these concepts at a high level. We're talking about people are struggling to understand what Bitcoin means to them now. And we're thinking, you know, years out.
There are tens of thousands of people who listen to the show. How do we keep all those listeners if they can't follow the conversation because they're too new? I think they can. I mean,
trust the audience.
Yeah.
They learn about Bitcoin, and then they use this show to increase their level of knowledge and catch up. And I think that's why you see new listeners coming in, catching one episode, and then starting from the very beginning and listening to 68 episodes.
Yeah, that's right. That's completely right.
We've seen this pattern repeat again and again. So I don't think that's a problem. Essentially, you created a library of content that people can catch up with. But let's talk more about the accelerating nature of this phenomenon. I mean, the last 6 months have gone past in a blur. But at the same time, I think there's this really interesting dichotomy, which is that it's very easy for us being in this bubble and being caught up in all of this forward motion to assume that Bitcoin has arrived, to assume that essentially all of the big things have already happened, or that the prices really shot up to high levels, or that now Bitcoin is expensive, the opportunities have been missed. And I think that is so wrong.
Yeah.
I think right now people are panting from the great ascent up the mountain, and I'm looking up and I see Everest ahead of us. We haven't even crossed the foothills. This is so small. I remember at the San Jose conference, I was ranting and raving to one of my friends about how amazing Bitcoin was and how amazing this conference was, and how, there's all this global recognition. Imagine at that time, all this global recognition about Bitcoin and how we're beginning to get awareness in mainstream. And my friend sent me a link to a conference that was happening at the San Jose Convention Center that I think was about agricultural equipment, that had 10 times the audience that we had at the Bitcoin conference, with one word underneath the link: perspective. Such a gift. Anyway, so perspective, people. We are still smaller than, there are fetishes with more people in their community than ours at the moment. There are specialized dentist conferences that have 100 times the audience that we have at even the biggest Bitcoin conferences. And still 99.999% of the population of the world has never heard of Bitcoin. In the heart of Silicon Valley, you go speak to some of the most cutting edge, forward-thinking technologists, and 9 out of 10 of them haven't even heard about Bitcoin. If they have, they think it's some kind of funny money. They don't understand what it is and the implications it has. The weird thing here is that while we're going at this breakneck speed and it feels like so many things have happened, we've barely touched the consciousness of the world. And what that tells me is, oh my God, 2014 is going to be absolutely breakneck. Seriously. I mean, hold on to your hats. Human beings have a very hard time intuitively understanding exponential growth curves. It's something that Ray Kurzweil wrote about in The Singularity is Near. It's a very interesting book if you want to read it. But we try to extrapolate, and we can only extrapolate intuitively on a linear scale. So when you're doing that on an exponential curve, when you look out before the elbow of the curve, everything looks horizontal. And then one day, without you even noticing, you look ahead and everything's vertical. And you just pass the curve. And we haven't even hit the elbow yet. If this is the rate of growth and breakneck speed we've got at this point, at some point we're going to have our AOL moment. At some point we're going to have a crisis, a precipitating event that is going to shift the balance dramatically. That tipping point has not happened. And when that tipping point happens, what we're seeing today is going to be small potatoes compared to where Bitcoin could go. Now, don't discount the possibility that we could all crash and fall on our faces because of some insidious bug in the code. I don't think there are any external factors that can bring down Bitcoin anymore. We're past that hump. We're too big. We're too global. We're too widespread to shut down from the outside. We can only do it from the inside now. Bitcoin can only commit suicide. And that is a possibility over the next 3 years.
Well, that's the Facebook paradox, right?
It's a diminishing possibility. And really what I see is the potential for us to make it as far, just simply survive at this breakneck speed until we hit the elbow. And then amazing things will happen. Then we change the world.
This is true about any network reliant, right? I mean, like if you're talking about Facebook, essentially they're also trying to not break themselves while also trying to make it so that they're good for the future, you know, so that they can have models to monetize and all these various things. It's the same thing with Bitcoin. Ultimately, MySpace isn't going to destroy Facebook, but Facebook could destroy Facebook. So that, I mean, basically, is that what you're saying here?
Yes, but there's one big difference. And I think the big difference that most people haven't realized is they look at parallel models like, for example, the deployment of the internet. And that required some serious infrastructure heavy lifting, which we don't need in Bitcoin. And you look at Facebook. For Facebook to sustain its growth, it had to develop an entirely new model for server deployment, for server provisioning, for building servers, for building data centers, and for operating a massive global network. We don't have any of that. You install the app, adoption itself creates infrastructure. Every person who adopts becomes part of the infrastructure by running a full node client if they can, by buying some mining rigs if they can. And essentially what's really interesting about this is that there are no constraints to the scale of Bitcoin in terms of infrastructure because adoption and infrastructure happen at the same time. So we don't have a problem of running out of capacity because every new user brings the capacity with them. And in fact, if you take it to its extreme, Bitcoin really expresses the core network effect concept that Bob Metcalfe first talks about in 1984, which is the value of the network increases exponentially with the addition of each node. Because there's no overhead to adding a node, the value of the network, the capacity of the network, the velocity of the network, all of those things really do increase exponentially with the addition of each node. So I think the next year, the most important metric, the only metric that matters, is user adoption. And so we don't have many of the constraints. In fact, if we do nothing in the core protocol in Bitcoin right now, we can scale it. There are a few problems with blockchain size. There are a few problems with transaction velocity and capacity, but they're not that difficult and they can be addressed. Other than that, this network really doesn't have too many capacity constraints. So what we're going to see is a level of exponential growth that you very rarely see in technologies. And then add to that the other side of the coin, the economic incentives. Oh my God, the economic incentives. This is the first network effect that's fueled by money because it is money. And we have never in the history of technology seen that before. The first money that's digital has its own level of network effect that is a huge multiplier. So it creates investment from the inside out instead of expecting it to come from the outside in. And if we actually manage to bootstrap peer-to-peer crowdsourcing, we can accelerate it another factor of 10, another order of magnitude. So when people think, Bitcoin's expensive at 1,000, we're reaching our capacity limits, I laugh because, you have seen nothing yet. I really am very optimistic because the more time that goes by, the more Bitcoin survives, the stronger it gets. And it is already, I think, unstoppable, and it's simply accelerating like a freight train. And anybody who stands in front of it will be squished like a bug.
Purse.io is a gift exchange that lets you get Bitcoins at only a 6% premium and with a credit card. How does it work? You purchase items for other Purse.io members from their Amazon wish lists. In return, you get Bitcoins in the amount of the Amazon purchase. The more people participate, the more Bitcoins will be available. So tell your friends. Get exclusive access today at Purse.io.